Jonah was a prophet, a man chosen by God to deliver his messages to the people. In ancient times, prophets were revered and feared, for they spoke the words of the divine. Jonah's life was about to take a dramatic turn. God chose him for a special task, a mission that would test his faith and courage. Jonah was to go to the great city of Nineveh, a place known for its wickedness and sin. He was supposed to go to Nineveh, a wicked city, and deliver a message of repentance. The people of Nineveh were notorious for their evil ways, and their reputation had spread far and wide. God wanted Jonah to warn the people, to tell them that their city would be destroyed if they did not change their ways. This was a daunting task, one that filled Jonah with fear and uncertainty. They needed to change their ways. Jonah was afraid. He knew the people of Nineveh were his enemies, and he feared for his life. The thought of facing them and delivering such a dire message was overwhelming. He didn't want to go to Nineveh. The fear and hatred he felt towards the people of Nineveh clouded his judgment. He couldn't understand why God would want to show mercy to such a wicked city. The people there were his enemies. They had committed countless atrocities, and Jonah believed they deserved punishment, not forgiveness. His heart was filled with anger and resentment. He thought they didn't deserve God's mercy. Jonah couldn't fathom why God would want to give them a chance to repent. In his mind, they were beyond redemption, so he decided to run away. Jonah thought he could escape his divine mission by fleeing. He believed that by running in the opposite direction, he could avoid the responsibility that God had placed upon him. He boarded a ship going in the opposite direction. Jonah hoped that by putting distance between himself and Nineveh, he could escape God's call. But little did he know, God's reach extends far beyond any earthly boundaries. Jonah thought he could escape God's plan, but he was wrong. God had other plans. Jonah's disobedience had consequences. His attempt to flee would not go unnoticed by the Almighty. A massive storm arose at sea. The winds howled and the waves crashed against the ship with a fury that could only be described as divine wrath. The storm was a direct response to Jonah's disobedience. It threatened to break the ship apart. The sailors were terrified. They had never seen a storm of such magnitude, and they knew that their lives were in grave danger. They knew this was no ordinary storm. The sailors realized that this tempest was sent by a higher power, and they began to fear the wrath of the gods. Little did they know it was the God of Jonah who was behind the storm, calling his prophet back to his true path. The terrified sailors prayed to their gods. They threw cargo overboard, hoping to lighten the ship and keep it from sinking. The storm raged on, relentless and unforgiving, with waves crashing over the deck and the wind howling like a banshee. They did everything they could to survive. They tied down loose items, secured the sails, and tried to steer the ship through the monstrous waves. Their faces were etched with fear and determination as they fought against the fury of the sea. Jonah, meanwhile, was fast asleep below deck. Oblivious to the chaos above, he lay in a deep slumber, undisturbed by the storm that threatened to tear the ship apart. His peaceful sleep was in stark contrast to the panic and desperation of the sailors. The ship's captain found Jonah. He was astonished to see someone sleeping so soundly amidst such turmoil. The captain shook Jonah awake, his voice filled with urgency and frustration. He questioned him about the storm. "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish," the captain demanded, his eyes wide with fear. The sailors realized Jonah was the cause of their troubles. They cast lots to find out who was responsible for the calamity, and the lot fell on Jonah. They surrounded him, their faces a mix of anger and fear. They were angry and scared. Jonah confessed his sin. He told them he was running away from the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. The sailors were even more terrified when they heard this. He told them to throw him overboard. "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," Jonah said, "and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon me." He believed this would calm the storm. The sailors hesitated. They didn't want to be responsible for his death. They tried to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. They didn't want to kill Jonah. Finally they agreed. They cried out to the Lord, "Please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, have done as you pleased." They hurled Jonah into the raging sea. Immediately, the storm subsided. The sea became calm. The sailors were amazed. They stood in awe, witnessing the sudden and miraculous change. They witnessed the power of Jonah's God. The once raging sea was now as smooth as glass, and the sailors offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him, deeply moved by the divine intervention they had just experienced. Jonah 1:17 tells us the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. God didn't abandon Jonah in his disobedience. Instead, God provided a unique rescue plan. God prepared a large fish. This was no ordinary fish. It was a creature chosen by God for this specific purpose. The fish swallowed Jonah whole. He was trapped inside its belly. This event highlights God's sovereignty. He controls even the creatures of the sea. He can use anything to fulfill his purposes. Even a giant fish can become an instrument of his will. Inside the fish's belly, Jonah faced his mistakes. He was surrounded by darkness and the stench of fish. He had plenty of time to think. Jonah prayed to God from the depths of his despair. He realized the depth of his disobedience. He acknowledged God's power and mercy. He repented of his stubbornness and fear. Jonah's prayer is a powerful reminder. We can always turn to God no matter how far we stray. He hears our prayers, even in the darkest of places. Jonah's experience teaches us about God's patience. God disciplined Jonah. Being swallowed by a fish was a terrifying experience. This was a consequence of his disobedience. However, God also showed Jonah incredible mercy. He could have left Jonah to die in the sea. Instead, he preserved his life in a miraculous way. The fish became a symbol of both judgment and mercy. It was a consequence for Jonah's actions. It was also a vessel of protection and a second chance. This event reminds us that God's love is intertwined with his justice. He disciplines those he loves. But his discipline is never without purpose. Section 6. The shadow of the cross. Jonah's experience foreshadows Jesus' death and resurrection. Jonah spent 3 days and nights in the fish's belly. Jesus spent 3 days and nights in the tomb after his crucifixion. Both Jonah and Jesus emerged from their respective tombs. This parallel points to God's plan of salvation. Jonah's ordeal foreshadowed Jesus' ultimate sacrifice. It reminds us that God can bring life from death, hope from despair. This connection deepens the meaning of Jonah's story. It transforms it from a simple tale of disobedience to a powerful premonition of God's redemptive plan. Section 7. A resurrection foretold. After 3 days, the fish vomited Jonah onto dry land. He was alive and well. This was a miracle. It was a testament to God's power over life and death. Jonah's experience foreshadowed Jesus' resurrection. It showed that God can bring life from death. This connection gives us hope. No matter how dire our circumstances, God can deliver us. He can bring us through our darkest moments. Jonah's story is a reminder that God's plans are always greater than our mistakes. He can use even our failures for his glory. Section 8. The unfathomable depths of God's love. Jonah's journey teaches us about God's love and mercy. God forgave Jonah for his disobedience. He gave him a second chance to fulfill his calling. God's love is not limited to those who obey him perfectly. He extends his grace even to those who run away from him. This story is an encouragement for us. We all make mistakes. We all fall short of God's glory. But God's love is always available to us. If we turn to him with a repentant heart, he will forgive us. He will give us a new beginning. Section 9. Embracing our own Nineveh. In the biblical narrative, Nineveh was a city that represented everything Jonah feared and despised. It was a place of great wickedness, and yet it was the very place God called Jonah to go. This story is not just about Jonah, it's about us too. We all have our own Ninevehs, those places or people we are reluctant to face. Jonah's story challenges us to confront our own Ninevehs. It asks us to look deep within ourselves and identify those areas where we are resistant to God's call. Are there places we avoid because they make us uncomfortable? Are there people we shy away from because they are different from us? Are there places we are reluctant to go? Perhaps it's a neighborhood in our city that we deem unsafe, or a community that holds different beliefs and values. These are our modern-day Ninevehs. And just like Jonah, we are called to go there, to bring God's message of love and redemption. Are there people we hesitate to love because of our prejudices? Maybe it's someone who has wronged us, or a group of people we don't understand. Our biases and fears can create barriers, But God's love knows no bounds. He calls us to break down these walls and extend His grace to everyone. God calls us to share His love with everyone. This means stepping out of our comfort zones and reaching out to those who are different from us. It means being a light in the darkness and a beacon of hope to the hopeless. This includes those we find difficult to love. It's easy to love those who love us back, but the true test of our faith is loving those who challenge us, who test our patience, and who may even oppose us. This is the kind of love that God calls us to embody. Jonah's journey teaches us to embrace God's mission. It shows us that even when we are reluctant, God can use us in powerful ways. Our willingness to follow His call can lead to transformation, not just in others, but in ourselves as well. It encourages us to step out in faith, to trust that God will guide our steps even when the path is uncertain. To believe that He will provide the strength and courage we need to fulfill His purposes, we must trust that God will equip us to fulfill His purposes. He doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called. When we step out in faith, we can be assured that God will provide everything we need to accomplish His will. Let us be vessels of God's mercy and grace, just like the fish that swallowed Jonah. That fish was an instrument of God's salvation, and we too can be instruments of His love and mercy in the lives of others. Let us carry His love to every corner of the earth. Let us be bold in our faith, compassionate in our actions, and unwavering in our commitment to God's mission. In doing so, we can transform our own Ninevehs and bring glory to His name.